Hey everybody, DJ here. This is going to be a tutorial on AMD ProRender and using displacement maps. I'm going to be showing you two different ways to do this. And by the end, you should know how to make something that looks kind of like this. And before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. And let's go ahead and jump into Blender here. And what I have right here is just a rounded cube. And I'll turn on the overlay so you can see what's going on. For anybody, this is not necessarily a absolute beginner's tutorial on ProRender or anything like that. You should check out some of my other videos, since in order to do this properly, you do have to have your object UV unwrapped, and I have a series on how to do that with my beginner tutorial series on the Blender engine and modeling and all that. But basically what we have here is we have a rounded cube, and if I go into the UV editing, you can see that this is how it's been unwrapped. So it's just a very simple unwrap just so that we can get our image maps mapped to the surface of our object. And like I said in the beginning, we're going to be going over two different ways. There is a displacement method that uses a modifier, and there's one that uses a node within the shader uh, within the materials shader. So I'm going to show you how to do those two things, and there's benefits to both, but I do prefer one over the other, and I'll explain that as we get further. So by the end, you should be able to make something that looks kind of like this. Uh, all of these materials really depend on what you want to do. So we're going to start from scratch just so I can show you how to do all of these things. And so we're going to go ahead and begin from scratch here. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you have the add-on that allows you to add mesh extra objects, and that allows you to add a rounded cube right here. And you can, sorry, let me open that again. It's right here, and that allows you to make a rounded cube in many different ways using some presets and stuff like that. But if you want to just keep it simple, what you can simply do is add a cube, hit Control 3, which will add a subdivision surface modifier over here, and then simply apply this, and you'll get a rounded cube. So if you want to do it that way, feel free, but I do recommend getting the add-on because I just think it's nicer to just quickly add it that way. So you'll need to UV unwrap and everything like I already said. This one has already been unwrapped. If you're wondering why I use this instead of a UV sphere, go ahead and watch my beginner's tutorial series on why I do that. But basically, this is what you want to start with. And I'm going to make this very simple just for this tutorial series. I'm going to duplicate, and then I'm going to delete or remove this material. And I'm just going to show you from scratch how to create a material that uses a displacement modifier. And what you'll want to use, I would recommend, is a displacement map. Usually it's auto-generated or pre-generated from a set of materials. And if you go onto the internet, go to texturehaven.com, textures, and you can download any number of textures from here that have displacement maps to them. That's what creates these really cool effects here. So what I got was, or what I'm going to be using is, I believe it's rock 6. So you can take a look for rock number 6, and this will really work with anything. So you can find whatever material you like and do it that way. But if you're following with me, find the rock 6 maps, download all of those, and use those for what I'm going to show you in a moment. So let's go ahead and jump back over to this one here. And we're going to be adding a new material. And you can start off with any of these if you'd like, but really I'm just going to hit new. And you can see that it starts off with a principled BSDF. And that's okay because we're going to use this just to jumpstart this our materials here. So make sure you go to Edit, Preferences, and you look for Node Wrangler and check that on. And for those of you who are new, if you look down on the bottom left, you can see there's a keyboard and a mouse to show you my keystrokes. And I'm also going to turn on my screencast keys right here, so you can see the the keys that I'm pressing right down here on the left. So basically, what we're going to do here is we're going to add a couple of uh, image maps really quickly, and you can do that by holding Control and Shift and T. and this will open up multiple files. And I'm just going to navigate over to where I have my Rock '06 image maps, and I'm just going to choose a couple things here. And you can turn on the thumbnails here to choose. So here's the diffuse. Let's grab the roughness as well. I'm going to hold Control here. And let's get the normal map, and let's get this displacement map right here. Okay, and you'll notice if you open these up in like an image editor like Photoshop or GIMP, or you just look at it through whatever your uh, regular image viewing software is on your computer, whether it's Mac or Windows, you'll notice that it's quite a bit soft compared to the rest. Some of these are very harsh and sharp as far as the detail, and the displacement map looks a little bit soft, and that's fine. That's what you want. You want your displacement map to be soft. You do not want it to be very, very sharp like you would sometimes a normal map or something like that. And there are reasons for that. So right here, you'll see there's a button that says Principled Texture Set. So we're gonna click that, and you can see that it opens up multiple image maps with our mapping node here, our texture coordinate here, and all of this right here. Make sure, by the way, that you're on the Radeon ProRender. This is a ProRender tutorial, so make sure that you've changed your render engine over here to Radeon ProRender to do this correctly. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to move this principled BSDF right up here, and we're going to hit Shift A to add shader and the RPR Uber node. Okay. And we have the diffuse, the reflection. We're going to turn on normal since we have a normal map. Simply take the normal map, pipe that right in there. Take the roughness map, and you'll put it into the diffuse and the reflection roughness right there. And then for the diffuse or the base color, you just pop that right into the diffuse color right there. If you want to put that in the reflection color, you can, but that's really up to you. So make sure, and I'm using the newest build. So this is 2.5.22 that I'm using right now. So the render engine selections for the quality is full, legacy, high, medium, and low. Low, medium, and high we're not going to use. There's actually some issues with that. But full works and legacy works really well as well. Still, this is what used to be called 1.0, and full is now the 2.0. Legacy, if you're doing like really long-term projects, this is probably the best one to use because it's more stable. Full has some issues, but the rendering is quite fast. But it does have problems with volumetrics and a couple other bugs. They're still fixing some things. So, but if you're using a official build that doesn't have the legacy or full, and it just has full, or there's a 1.0 and a 2.0, this method works on either, or both of these methods work on either setting, so it will work completely fine. But I'm going to be using full. And so let's just take a quick look at what this looks like. I'm going to hit N and T to get rid of my tools on the side here. And let's take a look at the rendered view. So here's the image that's mapped. And if you look right here in the node editor, you have the displacement right here. And it's set into the material output, but it doesn't seem to be actually creating a displacement. You can actually see that it is a flat sphere still, okay? And that is because the settings inside of this shader needs to tell, you have to tell the material that you want this displacement node to actually displace the surface instead of it just being like a bump node, okay? So if you go over here to your material properties, go to the drop down that says displacement, and you'll see right here displacement method bump only, displacement only, and displacement and bump. Now I'm going to just press displacement because I want you to see what it looks like with just that. And I do recommend making sure that you save and change this to a solid mode first. Go over here, change the method right here from bump only to displacement only. And you can see that when I did that, it didn't really do anything. The geometry didn't change. But if you press rendered mode, and it will take a moment to load up, you'll see that now there is a displacement effect that's on the surface. And if I turn off the overlays, you can see that now the surface is displaced. I'm going to right click, shade it to smooth, which didn't really do anything, but it still looks really blocky. Okay, I'm sure you can all see that. And the reason is that the displacement is displacing the surface based on, and let's go to this here, and we will turn on the overlays. It's based on this geometry, okay? So it's displacing the surface, but we have a very low poly count here, okay? There's not enough subdivisions for it to really displace the surface to make it look really nice and refined. So the displacement effect, you have to actually add uh, a subdivision surface modifier to your objects to have this displacement node project correctly. Now, this is one area where the Cycles engine, you can benefit from a dicing mode that allows you to subdivide a object based on how far away you are from it. But that's in the experimental build, and I'll cover that in a later tutorial. But if you're using ProRender, you need to know how to use this displacement anyway. So what you have to do is you have to actually subdivide your surface. So I'm going to turn on a subdivision surface modifier, and we're going to turn this up to 3 for now. And let's take a look at that and see how this displacement is currently working with just a 3 level on our displacement. So if we jump around and we look around at this, now you can see that with that 3 setting, there is a much nicer subdivision surface going on here. You can still see that there are, you can see some of the planes here, which can be a little bit of an issue depending on how close and how far away you are from this object. But if you're far enough away like this, it really shouldn't be that much of an issue. You can turn this up. You can actually add multiple subdivision surface modifiers if you want to make this more and more refined. It's really up to you on how you want to deal with that. Now, let's say that you added the displacement, but you didn't really like it was either too crazy, like the displacement effect was way too strong, or not strong enough. You can change the scaling right here. So let's change the scale to like a 3. And you can see that it just jumped up the size or the scaling of that displacement modifier. And if you set it to a zero point 0.5 or something like that, you can make the displacement much less noticeable. Now, the mid-level, basically, it decides where the displacement effect is going to happen from your geometry object. So if we zoom in a little bit here, and you can see the outline of the actual object, and let's change the mid-level to a 0, you can see that that has that effect. And if we change it to a 1, you can see that it has that effect there. So this outline is actually where our 3D object is, and where you can see it rendered, that is the actual displacement effect that's happening. So when you render out your scene, that's what you'll end up seeing. Okay. Now, this can be very confusing and very difficult for a lot of people because basically you're not seeing, if we go to the solid view here, if you have a ground plane that you're setting this on, it's very difficult to tell where that displacement effect is happening. And I find that that is a bit of an issue, especially if you are trying to have a scene that has animating objects and your displacement needs to sort of be set on something or whatever. And that's why I actually prefer to use a displacement modifier in this tree here rather than this method here. Now, there are some potential good things that can come out of using this displacement node. Hopefully, they'll make it to where there will be a procedural way of dicing up your object so that it only has parts of it super subdivided as close it is to camera, and then as it goes away, it won't be as subdivided, which is what's in the Cycles engine. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out my later tutorial or look forward to that coming out where I'll actually show you how to do that. But, some of you guys are just using this ProRender to do your renders, and you just want something really cool to have a displacement effect, whether it's your main object that's being rendered or whatever the reason is. So, to kind of bypass this issue, I actually recommend that you use a displacement modifier. So if we go in here, add a displacement modifier right here, you can see that it kind of made something weird happen. So if I take the strength and I move it down and I move it up, it's doing stuff to it for some reason, but I didn't really add anything, so what the heck's going on? So I'm going to set this strength back to a 1. And basically what you need to do here is you have to add a image texture to this to make it an actual displacement. So what you need to do is you need to click on this new button here, name it what you want. I'll call this rock underscore '06, and hit this little like pill looking button here. And what we want to do is go to image or movie, settings, so image settings, open, and you'll need to navigate to your displacement map. And you can really use any black and white image, and I'll show you how you can alter a couple things. But you see this Rock 06 displacement 4K PNG that I'm using here. So I open that up, and there it is. So there's my displacement map. Now, it's not really done correctly, and there's a couple settings that we'll have to do here and set something in the modifier, but I just want to show you a couple things before we begin altering some of those. So if we look really close here, you can actually see the where the subdivisions are. And if we increase the subdivision here, you can see how more and more refined it's getting as we increase the levels of subdivision in the viewport. You can see that's really detailed now. Okay, so that's at a level 6. And the render, make sure you set that as 6 too if that's what you really, really want. Okay, and notice that in the node method here, we didn't see that kind of detail. Okay, now, sometimes you'll notice that it's a little bit too sharp. The angle changes and things like that are a little bit too sharp, and you want to adjust that. So if we go back down to the texture properties here, or you can click on the little pill thing again if you went to the modifiers panel. And if you go, we actually don't need this alpha here, so you can uncheck that alpha. And let's leave mapping alone for the moment. And if you go down to where it says sampling, you'll see there's an interpolation, map, and all this sort of stuff here. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to soften the image. It's going to add a little bit of a blur to this so that it won't be so sharp if you're finding that that's an issue with your displacement map. So if you change this to a, let's say, Gaussian filter, and you can play around with these as you'd like, change the size to like a 10, just so I can show you what it looks like. You can see that it now softened everything. So if I zoom in really close right here, I change this size to a 1. You can see how that kind of sharpened everything up. But if I take it to a, let's say, 20, it makes everything a lot softer. So if you're finding that when you're adding your displacement map, you can see the pixelation of the image map, and you don't have any other image map, or you can't really add a bigger one because the VRAM on your card can't handle it for the render or whatever it is, that is how you can handle softening up those your pixelated image so that it doesn't look so weird when you go to render. Now the other thing here is the mapping. So if we look at our image map here, the image map, we currently have a scaling of 1, but let's say that you want it to be a 2, you have to set this to a 2 and then also set this to a 2 as well. And after you set those to a 2, you can see that it's now mapped it twice. The tiling is now mapped twice. So you have to make sure that you do that if you're trying to make it a 1-to-1 according to your actual image maps that you have here. Now, if you're mixing things together like a different displacement because you just want a bumpy sort of surface, but your image map is just for the image roughness and the normal and everything else, but you wanted a little bit of a displacement, we're using a different image or a different, just a different overall look for the displacement, you can make this whatever you want. But if you want it to be a 1-to-1, make sure that you're setting your mapping here the same as here, okay? So let's set this back to a 1. And if you'll remember, when we went to the camera view, the texture was more angled towards us, not in this manner here. And what's happening is if we go over to the actual modifier in the modifier properties, if you look here where it says coordinates, it says local, you need it to be the UV because we're using a UV unwrap. And then you can choose your UV map here if you have more than one that you've created. And direction, you want this to be on normal. There's a few situations where you want this to be different, but for most of you, you want this to be on normal. And you can see now it's pointed directly at us. And if we look at this in the Let's just make sure this is not connected here. Or if you want to use this actually as a bump map, you can place this into the displacement, go to the materials, and change this to a bump only. And now it will only be a black and white value bump map, okay? If that's what you really, really want. So I'm gonna go ahead and save, go to the rendered view, and we'll take a look at what this looks like. So there you have it. You have the displacement there, and you can adjust the same way that you can adjust the mid-level and scaling here. You can change it in the displacement map here with the strength and the mid-level. You can change this to a 0. You can change the strength to a 10 if you want. Whatever you want, you can set all of this right in here, and you can actually see the displacement as you're working on your object. And if you really create a unique looking scene or whatever, you can have something that looks kind of like this, which I use for the title card, and I'll just turn this on rendered so you can check it out. So there we have basically a rock that is also on this asphalt, and you can use this method to create a really, really cool effect for a ground plane or whatever it is that you're doing. And you can see how I used it here. I basically created a PBR map here and then used a displacement modifier here. And the same thing with the rock to make it look really unique and really realistic. So that's the long and short of it. Hopefully, you guys were able to learn something here about how to use displacement maps or these two methods inside of ProRender. Again, please like and subscribe to the channel and, of course, liking the video. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials. So that's the long and short of it. Hopefully, you guys learned how to create this displacement map in two ways to utilize that for whatever your scene needs. I will be covering how to add a displacement map for both. I will be covering how to add a displacement map for cycles and for the LuxCore engine in a few. So that's the long and short of it. Hopefully, you guys learned how to add. So that's the long and short of it. Hopefully, you guys learned how to add these two. Hopefully, you guys So that's the long and short of it. Hopefully you guys learned these two methods on how to add a displacement map accurately and correctly inside of Radeon ProRender. In some future episodes, I'm going to be showing you guys how to do this in LuxCore and in Cycles, so you can look forward to that if you're using those engines as well. Again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.